Crisis management, what to do if. Just last week in the Wall Street Journal, article that said, mass shootings on the rise, subtitle, FBI says most take place at businesses or schools, more emergency drills held. Would your staff know what to do in the event of a fire or an explosion, a tornado or a hurricane, a bomb threat or an intruder on your campus? Would your students know what to do? As educators, we have been entrusted with the academic lives of our students. As Christian educators, we have the additional privilege of nurturing our students' spiritual lives. But first and foremost in our duties is the physical protection of the young people under our care. Now, even though our understanding of the sovereignty of God, our understanding of the omnipotence of God, the omnipresence of God, we realize that, in point of fact, we're not really able to protect anybody from anything. However, that doesn't let us off the hook. In Psalm 127 and verse 1, it says, "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain." It's God who keeps us safe, but he still expects there to be a watchman. Too often, this is true in any school, but I think it's especially true in our schools. Too often, with too much to do and not enough time, personnel, and resources to do it, Christian schools often allow the urgent to push aside the important. After all, is there really time to outline what to do in the event of a tornado or a bomb threat or an intruder on your campus? Point of fact, there has to be time to outline what needs to be done. In this workshop, I want to bring some issues to your attention about which you may not have ever thought before, and direct you to resources that will help you know what to do if. In preparing for this workshop, I read quite a number of public school emergency or contingency plans. They were very large documents, and they had very little that would be of use to you. What I want to do in this workshop is to keep it practical, simple, and doable. Things that are realistically possible, at least some of them, for you. And even then, I don't expect you to be able to go home and do everything that I talk about. But if you go home, if only you think about some things you've not thought about before, or if you go home and do one or two or three of the things we talk about, at least you're moving in the right direction. According to a retired chief of school police, government school, public school police, he said there are 3 reasons why school security fails. He wasn't thinking that when he said it, but it's true of any school. The 3 reasons are: it can't happen here, we can't afford it, and we don't have time to do all that. That's a classic illustration of the urgent pushing aside the important. It can't happen here, we can't afford it, we don't have time to do all that. If you are going to develop a useful emergency plan for your school, the very first thing you need to do is to acknowledge that school crises are in fact a reality. School crises have become a part of our national consciousness. The first line of defense is to admit that there is the possibility that terrorism, violence, or natural disaster could strike your school. Knowing what to do when faced with a crisis can be the difference between calm and chaos, between courage and fear, and literally the difference between life and death. There are thousands of school fires every year across the United States, but relatively speaking, there is minimal damage to life and property. Why is that the case? Because almost every school in the country has fire drills. So at least in that case, everybody knew what to do. So the damage, relatively speaking, was minimal, and the injury to life was minimal. We need to extend that same level of preparedness to all the risks that a school might face. Denial of that fact does not reduce fear or panic or casualties when real situations occur. Fear is best managed by education, communication, and preparation. We have to avoid the "that would never happen here" mindset. Many schools, I might even go so far as to say as most schools, have a dangerous "that would never happen here" mentality. If you were able to ask any staff member of any school that has in fact experienced a crisis of one kind or another, if you were to ask any of those staff members, I believe the majority of them, if not all of them, would say something along the lines, "I never thought that would happen here." A perfect illustration of that, 2008, 6 years ago, Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania. You would be hard-pressed to find a more serene, a more pastoral, a more beautiful part of the country than Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The entire county almost is small, it's checkerboarded with small Amish farms. Who could have imagined in that beautiful, serene atmosphere that a man would walk into a one-room Amish schoolhouse and shoot innocent children in cold blood? But it happened. And if I can say it this way, if it can happen in Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania, it can happen anywhere. In our A.C.E. administrators training, we teach, now the application I make in administrators training is different from the application here, but the principle remains the same. That it is better to decide and plan in advance what you will do in a particular situation, praying that you will never have to face that situation. But if you do, then you've already decided what your response would be to that situation. Making these kinds of plans in the calm of your office or the calm of your staff meeting is far better than being in the midst of a crisis, the heat, the panic, the terror of the moment, and then trying to decide how you would respond. Praying, "Dear God, what do I do now?" If you're going to establish a workable plan for your school, that you have to answer the question first, why have a plan at all? Educators, you are caring people who typically put the best interest of their students ahead of everything else, including your own personal safety. Given your responsibility for the safety of your students, school leaders can easily allow their emotions to override their cognitive thinking, analytical decision-making processes. Unfortunately, emotional decisions are never the best types of decisions for managing life-threatening emergencies. A solid school emergency plan in the hands of a well-trained staff can avoid emotional responses to school emergencies. It goes back, I just made the same point twice in essence, that when you don't have a plan, you're going to respond emotionally. Emotional decisions aren't the best decisions. But if you have a plan, then your response is cognitive, analytical, and well thought out. Your plan, as I intend to do in this workshop, needs to focus on fundamentals. A back-to-basics approach focuses on those actions taken immediately to manage the event which may threaten the safety of everyone at your school. The goal of your plan is to stop or minimize the event. Too often, school emergency plans are grossly oversized documents. If your school emergency plan looks like the Nashville Yellow Pages, it's not going to do you much good because nobody's going to know what's in there, and if they don't know what's in there, they can't do what it says do. By focusing on the fundamentals, a school staff has access to a more manageable, a more user-friendly guideline to reference while under the pressure of a real emergency. The less convoluted the document, the less complex the document, the greater the chance of that document being reviewed, understood, and used by the school staff, by your staff, in an emergency. And when you begin to put your plan to paper, which you want to do, this needs to be a usable working document. So you're going to put it to paper. Use plain language. That is a door, not a point of egress. And then I would encourage you also to not try to use the number codes that first responders, police and fire do. I don't know what they are, but a 10-6, a 10-9, a 10-3, because your staff won't know what they are either. Just say what you want to say in your document so it's easily understood. Then, after you've answered the question of why, you're going to focus on the fundamentals. You begin developing your plan. As I've already said more than once, a plan provides for cognitive responses. The first and best line of defense is a well-trained, alert school staff and student body. Without a plan, there is a tendency to overreact rather than underreact. Emotions overtake reason and common sense. Have you got the point? I've made it 3 times. A plan avoids emotional responses. And then there are resources available to you. Now, your plan, however, must be developed by the administration, the staff of your school, in cooperation with the first responders in your community, the police and fire. Even in a more metropolitan area, I think first responders, the police and the fire, would be willing to help you develop your plan because they are in your community. They may very well have helpful suggestions that have worked well for others in your community. Another resource would be the website of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. Deals primarily with natural disasters. On their website, there are links to information specifically geared towards schools. There's also the Department of Homeland Security. This would be obviously terror threats primarily. Again, there are links on the website directed or designed to help schools. The American Red Cross, natural disasters, but they have things available for you to help a school develop a plan. Your local public school system, their website, they may very well have a downloadable, printable copy of their school emergency plan. Again, it's in your community, so the threats that they face would be the same kind of threats that you could possibly face. And then the U.S. Department of Education website also is a resource, and obviously directed primarily towards schools. But those are all a place to start. You do not want to rely on a template emergency plan. Templates only provide a place to start. You know what a template is? It's generic, has fill in the blanks. If you download and print a template and put your school name and address on it and say you have a school emergency plan, no, you don't. You have a template with the blanks filled in is all that you have. There is no cookbook approach to crisis preparedness. Fill in the blank templates or plans with just name changes offer increased risks to safety and potential increased liability. Now, in this workshop, we're going to talk entirely about protecting your staff and your students. I will return to it briefly at the end of the workshop, but you need to be aware that the absence of a school emergency plan in the litigious society in which we live, I just like that word, it's a big word, you know what it means? People like to sue each other. I mean, if somebody can sue a fast food company because they dumped a cup of coffee in their own lap, we live in a litigious society. Absent a school emergency plan, you are opening yourself up for increased legal and financial liability if someone is injured. That's the side note. We're going to talk primarily about safety. There are expert consultants available. You can hire them. You're going to pay them, who are available to help schools develop crisis or emergency preparedness plans. And if you do use their services, they can provide a lot of information. They can provide training. And if you have a plan already, they can provide commentary and suggestions to make your plan more usable. But as I said, your plan needs to be written by you. Each community, each school has its own history, culture, and way of doing things. Schools are at risk for different kinds of crises depending on their location. In Middle Tennessee, a hurricane's not too much of a threat. If it is, it's a leftover hurricane, so to speak. But coastal Mississippi, coastal Texas, coastal Alabama, Florida, a hurricane's a very real possibility. A school needs to plan what to do with that. A forest fire. While I was in Maryland, if there was a forest fire, we wouldn't have given it a second thought because they would deal with that in no time flat. In California, they're still fighting. Tens of thousands of acres are still burning. So schools in those parts of California need to figure out what to do in the event of a wildfire. Tornadoes are popping up in lots of places they didn't used to, but you know, a school in northern Arizona doesn't have to deal with a tornado. But schools in Tornado Alley, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, it's more than a chance. So you're at different schools are at risk for different kinds of things depending upon their location. And then each part of the country has their own definition of what constitutes a crisis. So you need to define a crisis for your school based on your vulnerabilities, your needs, and your assets. Your plan needs to be comprehensive in scope but simple in execution. It needs to be big enough to cover all the possibilities, but simple enough that people can remember what they're supposed to do in an emergency. Your emergency plan must be broad enough to include many potential crisis situations, yet simple enough to be easily remembered during or in the tension and the fog of a real crisis. If at all possible, more difficult, and the smaller the school, the more difficult this is, but if at all possible, the person responsible to execute your plan, once you have your plan in place, the person who pulls the trigger on your plan and makes sure it works should not be a person who has direct supervision of children. In other words, that person shouldn't be a supervisor because the supervisor's attention and focus is going to be divided. He or she's worrying about their own students at the same time they're trying to worry about everybody. Almost anybody can be the person to put your plan in execution. Pastor, administrator, church or school secretary, if you have a full-time custodian, it can be them. But you want to avoid, if at all possible, that person having direct supervision of children. And your plan also needs to take into account two groups of people that you may not think of at first considering your plan. The first group of people you need to remember to include are those children or staff that have physical, developmental, or mental challenges. Now, they are functioning quite well in your learning centers. They do fine in school, and everybody's aware of the special circumstances, the special needs they may have. But in an emergency, if a person, for example, has crutches or canes or a walker or a wheelchair, they may get trampled. So you have to build how you're going to deal with that situation into your plan so you know in advance what you're going to do. The second group is any of your staff or students whose first language is not English. Now again, they know their English, they're doing their paces in English, you do chapel and devotions in English, everything is fine. But in a crisis, you're going to be using words you don't normally use in school. And those children or staff need to understand what those words mean, rather than you barking orders at them and they don't understand what you're saying. So part of your drill, you need to rehearse with a person in that situation. When I say this, this is what I mean. This is what you need to do. Your plan should use an all hazards approach. Potential events should include situations such as weather, natural disasters. If your school is near an interstate or a railroad track, you might consider how you would handle a hazardous material spill. Suppose a train derails and it had tanks of chlorine gas on there. How would you deal with a hazardous material spill? Power outages, as well as man-made acts of crime and violence, such as suicides, stabbings, hostage situations, shootings, an intruder in the building, and other worst-case scenarios. That's what you are preparing for, worst-case scenarios. Don't fall into it could never happen here. Worst-case scenarios is what you're preparing for. I am 60 years old. I grew up in the Cold War. I grew up in a generation, and many of you in the room were like that, we were told more than once there was the possibility that the Russians would attack the United States and drop a nuclear bomb. So when I was in elementary school, we had nuclear attack drills. We were told to go out into the hallway, so there'd be two walls between us and the outside, that wedge of light where the doorway was. You didn't sit in that wedge of light, but you moved over. You sat down with your back against the wall of the hall. You pull your knees up to your chest, you put your head between your knees. That happened over 50 years ago in my life. But I still remember what I was supposed to do. You think it's because we practiced it a time or two? Yes. So if I am ever in Kent Island Elementary School and the Russians drop a bomb, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. Any emergency plan is going to address certain preparedness procedures. 3 primary ones. The first one is an evacuation. That is the one with which we are most familiar. The most common emergency response, it's a fire drill, for example, and is appropriate for any situation in which students need to leave the building, assemble, and be accounted for. So like when you have a fire drill, everybody goes outside, you meet at a predetermined place on the parking lot or wherever, and you account for everybody there. Number one. Number 2, response is a group assembly. This is when students need to assemble, be accounted for, but they don't leave the building. You would have everybody come to a multi-purpose room, the gym, the church auditorium, whatever. You get everybody in one place, and then you account for them. That could be, for example, a hazardous material spill. If it was on that side of the building, you want to put everybody on this side of the building. Evacuation group assembly number 3 is a lockdown. That's when students need to be accounted for, but they do not need to assemble or to leave the building. In our schools, a lockdown would be basically everybody would probably stay in their learning centers. This would be a response to an intruder in the building, for an example, or a medical emergency in the hallway. There's been a terrible accident or something's happened to someone, medical personnel are treating them in the hallway. You keep all the kids in the learning center. So you got evacuation, group assembly, lockdown. A very important part of all 3 of those that can easily be overlooked, even though I said account for everybody in all 3, is a roll call. And a roll call is decidedly different from a head count. On a roll call, you need to know who's there and who's not there. Not just that you're missing 2 people, you need to know who they are. So, puts a whole new flavor to attendance during goal check. Mrs. Dawson and I, for 4 years, served in the same learning center. Mrs. Dawson always did goal check. You know, some people don't do bathrooms, some people don't do windows, some people don't do laundry. Mr. Dawson doesn't do goal check. If I could avoid it, hated doing goal check. So Mrs. Dawson knew who wasn't there. I'd be 10 o'clock, I'd be looking for somebody, and they're not in their office, and I ask her where they were, and she goes, oh, they're not here today. Your staff needs to know who is not there. They're absent. Or you need to remember, oh, it's a volleyball game or a basketball game today. And you've got 6, 8, 10 people who aren't here because they're at an away game. Or it's a field trip. A whole learning center may be gone. In the emergency, you need to account for people, but you need to know who you're looking for. In essence, you don't want to run back into a burning building looking for somebody that wasn't even there to begin with. A roll call is very, very important. In your school, and again, in our schools, this would primarily be your learning centers to establish a safe room. A safe room is where a room becomes, nobody can see in it and nobody can get in it when the students are in there. Mrs. Dawson and I, about 18 months ago, did an adjunct course at a Bible college up near Chicago, and we visited the A.C.E. school that's a part of that same ministry. While we were there, they were equipping that. Now, their learning center doors had a window, glass window on the top of the door. That's a legal protection for the staff. But you can look in the window and see all the children in there. So they were equipping their learning centers with a panel that slid up and fit over top of that glass. So were they made of wood? Okay. Wood's not bulletproof, but it's a whole lot more bulletproof than glass is. But then when that was up, you couldn't see in the learning center. And then I would encourage you to just like these doors here, have an electromagnetic lock that holds them open. Electromagnetic locks are locks that are held open by an electric current. When the current's broken, the lock locks. So you could have a system whereby all the doors, all your learning center doors could be locked from one location. The supervisor wouldn't have to go over, use a key, push a button, do anything. All the doors would be locked. Then that learning center became a safe room. You can't see in it, and they can't get in it. Probably the single event that put school emergency planning on the radar for a lot of us was Columbine High School, 15 years ago now, Columbine, Colorado. One of the things that contributed to the casualties in Columbine, I'm not judging anybody, please, I couldn't imagine to be there, but one of the things that contributed to the casualties was those teachers in the panic tried to get all the kids in the library. Problem was, the library in Columbine High School in 1999, the entire length or width of the library on the hall was all glass. So when those two boys walked down the hall and they saw these students hiding under tables and behind bookshelves, they just walked in the library and kept doing what they were doing. So that's why you want to establish a safe room. And then it's very important that your plan include a clearly designated chain of command. When the emergency happens, when the plan is put into effect, this may or may not be the same person who pulled the trigger, but everybody looks at Dr. Hill. Emergency, boom, this is the guy in charge. But suppose he's not there that day, so you need a number two. He's not there, then you look for Pastor Terry. If I know your name, you become a part of my workshop. And I would encourage you to go 3 deep. You have 3 people so that you've got somebody who's obviously in command, in charge when the plan is implemented. And then also you need to consider how your staff would communicate in an emergency. Suppose you went to a lockdown. They're all locked in the learning centers. How are you going to communicate? I would recommend inexpensive walkie-talkies. Don't have to be long range because you're only talking, inside your building. But you have to keep the batteries charged or use rechargeable batteries. You see, almost everybody has cell phones today. Yes, but there are many explosive devices that can be designed that are triggered by a cell phone signal. So you might want to use the walkie-talkies. Then evaluate the security of your building. You want to reduce and control access to your school. I would encourage you to establish one main entrance to your building. You pick whatever one you want, and then you put up signs on the outside right next to that main entrance, designating it as the main entrance. And then all the other doors, exterior doors on your building, you put a sign on them or next to them directing everybody to your main entrance so that anybody who's going to come in your building is going to come through the one door. That's a very important and easy thing to do. I would encourage you to create a visitor sign-in, sign-out, and escort procedure. You say, our school was so small. Well, you still don't want people wandering around in your building, people you don't know especially. Now, you've got a picture of our new office building in Hendersonville. That front door of that building is open from 7:30 in the morning to 8 in the morning when our staff arrive for work. When we go to staff devotions at 8 o'clock, the door locks, electromagnetic lock. It's locked the rest of the day. Our receptionist at her desk right inside the front door has a remote control that she can unlock the door from a distance, but nobody can get in unless she lets them in. And then once they're in, she has them sign in. She gives them a visitor's badge similar to what you have. And then if they came to see Mrs. Dawson or Dr. Johnson, she would call up to their office or somebody from that department. Somebody would come down and escort that person back up to where they were going. Again, you don't want people wandering around. And then when they leave, they come back down, turn in their visitor's badge, and sign out. We have a log of who was there. I want to encourage you to reduce, this is kind of the main entrance thing, but reduce the number of doors that can be opened from the outside. It should be that main entrance. All the rest of them should be locked from the outside. Now, they would have panic bars on the inside so you could get out from the inside, but nobody could get in from the outside. Train all of your staff to greet and challenge strangers. How far can a stranger walk through your building before somebody speaks to them. I'm a supervisor. I'm walking down the hall going to the office, and I pass somebody going the other way, and I shouldn't go, gee, I wonder who that was. No. Good morning. Are you looking for someone in particular? Could I help you find the office or whatever? That's friendly, but I challenged him. He knows that I noticed that he's there. Safety experts say if he ignored me and kept on walking, he's an immediate threat to your school. Not you, brother, but even if I don't know your name, you're still a part of my workshop. Because he's obviously focused. He's intent on going someplace to do something. Our son visited schools in Alabama to help Mr. Van Meter for a season. He went to visit a school. I don't know if it was now. I guess it was in Alabama. But anyway, he pulled in the parking lot, and there was one door that he saw. He walked through that door. He steps in the door, and he's in the middle of a daycare, preschool daycare. Lots of kids, no adults. So he walks across the preschool, the daycare, through another door. Now he's in a hallway. And he walks down the hallway looking indoors, trying to find somebody. He finally gets to an office where there's an adult. He was well into that building before anybody even knew he was there. If he'd been the wrong kind of man, he could have put all those children in that car and been who knows how far down the road before anybody even noticed that the children were missing. That shouldn't happen in your school. Train your students not to open doors to strangers or even people they know. Your exterior doors may have a little window in it. You knock on the door, and one of the kids sees you, and you say, let me in. Train them to say, no. It's going to take some training on your parents and your staff part. The reason being, they see you through the window, but they don't see me standing next to her with a gun in her ribs. They let you in, I'm in the building. Your parents, you have to train your parents. They won't like that because they'll have to go around the building and go in the front door instead of the one they're accustomed to coming into. And then you want to assess the integrity of your building. For example, are your window seals and your HVAC system capable of inhibiting the spread of smoke or fumes in case of a fire or a hazardous material spill? You want to establish a routine maintenance and timely repair program for all your exterior doors. You can say, yes, we have steel exterior doors. It's good. But if I walk up to the door and I yank real hard on the handle and it comes open anyway, you haven't accomplished much. Or I yank on it real hard and door frame and everything pulls out of the wall. Routine maintenance to make sure they are as secure as you think they want to be. You want them to be. And then the simple thing, trim the trees and the shrubs that are part of your landscaping up against the building so that people can't hide behind them. I mean, you don't have to get rid of them, but you don't need a bush this big. You can cut it back so it still looks nice, but it's more difficult for somebody to hide behind them. You want to check your fire alarms, fire extinguishers, and smoke detectors. Does your staff know how to use the fire alarm? You say, well, it's pretty simple. Not if the building's on fire. It may not be as simple as it looks. Smoke detectors, when's the last time you changed the batteries? Fire extinguishers, when's the last time you had them recharged? If it said September 2010, you probably ought to do something. And does your staff know how to use the fire extinguisher? You go, it's pretty simple. Again, not an emergency. It would be worth the cost of recharging a fire extinguisher in a staff meeting to demonstrate to everybody how you use the fire extinguisher. You pull the pin, squeeze the handle, and you point the hose at the bottom of the fire. You don't pull the pin, squeeze the handle, and see if anything comes out. They need to know how to use it. And then train your staff. Discuss after you have your school emergency plan in place. At staff orientation that you have right before school starts, several days you spend with your staff, go through your entire emergency plan from page 1 to the last page. So everybody sees the big picture and knows what they're supposed to do that next school year coming up. Then each week at your staff meeting, take 5 minutes and review one part of your emergency plan with your staff. That way it's fresh in their mind. So if something happens, they remember what they're supposed to do. If your staff is unclear about the plan, your plan, and their specific role in it, that confusion will be magnified in the students during an emergency. Students, especially the younger ones, do respond to adults' emotions and need to see that those in charge are in control. Is your staff going to be scared? Probably, but they're the adults. They need to keep the children. If one of your staff runs down the hall going, "We're all going to die," you have two emergencies now. Yes. Whatever the original emergency was, now you've got 15, 20, 25, 30, 50, 100 kids who are scared to death because Mrs. So-and-so said we're all going to die. Make sure that they understand them. And then assure your students that your school is safe, that it has a strong emergency plan in place, that God is in control, and that they do not need to worry or to be afraid, but they need to take emergency matters very seriously. When you have a drill, it's not, "Oh boy, I don't have to do my math goals," or "Oh boy, I get out of the learning center for a little bit." They need to understand, they need to pay attention to what it is they're being told to do and where they're supposed to go. And then have emergency drills. An emergency plan that isn't practiced is no emergency plan at all. It's a notebook that sits on a shelf gathering dust. And too often, schools conduct drills when it's convenient. I did. I'm going to have a fire drill, but I'm going to have it when it's least disruptive to the day. But fires don't happen when it's least disruptive to the day. And if you're going to drill a lockdown because you have an intruder in the building, an intruder may very well know that lunchtime things are a lot less structured at any school. So if they're going to try to get in, they're going to do it during lunchtime. So you need to drill a lockdown perhaps in lunch or during lunchtime. And then simple fire drill. Now you can start out with a pretty straightforward drill at the first of the year. But as you go through the year, subsequent drills, change it up a little bit. You're going to have a fire drill, and Pastor Terry, you're going to stand in this doorway and say, "You can't go this way. There's a fire here." Do the kids know if I can't go out this door, I need to go out that door? Now this next one, your high school boys would like this next suggestion. His supervisor won't like it. Go to one of your high school boys and say, "We're going to have a drill at 11 o'clock. At 5 minutes of 11, I want you to ask permission to go to the men's room. Then when we have the drill, you stay in there." He's going to think it's great. But you need to see how long it takes his supervisor, number one, to figure out that somebody's missing, and number two, who it is. Because that's real life. The emergency is not going to happen when everybody's in the learning center. They could be anywhere in the building for perfectly legitimate reasons. And if you can, again, even in a metropolitan community, I think many fire departments would help you. If at least once during the year, if you can have a firefighter specifically come and be a part of your drill, this is the primary reason. Your children, especially your little guys, need to see a firefighter in all their equipment. Boots, coat, helmet, and breathing apparatus. Because if the first time a child sees a firefighter with that in smoke, they look like a giant bug from Mars. They're going to run away from them, not to them. They need to realize that a person who looks like that is here to help them. You go towards them, not away from them. But they won't know that if they've never seen what they look like. And I think they would be most willing to help you do that. And then after you have your drills, you need to debrief them. What worked and what didn't? Did that supervisor ever figure out where that boy was or who he was? Don't be satisfied just because you had a drill. We had a drill. I'm so pleased with ourselves. No, what worked and what didn't? What do you need to change? And then you need to evaluate your threats, potential threats. Have protocols to assess and manage threats. With technology today, unless you take cell phones away from your students, which that's a whole other workshop, but if you let them keep their cell phones, I don't want to do my English goals today. I got to write an essay, and I don't want to do that. I'll text mom and say there's a guy in the hall with a gun. I wouldn't say it if it doesn't happen. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. Students need to know that responsible behavior is expected of them, that serious consequences will occur for inappropriate behavior, and that starting, spreading, and fueling rumors are serious offenses that jeopardize school safety. I would deal with that swiftly and severely. You want to get out of the Learning Center? Well, we can arrange that for like a week or forever. And then once you've assessed the threat, you know it's a legitimate threat, you want to put your communication process into effect, communicating accurately, timely, and redundantly. Once you've determined it's a real threat, your information, you need to make sure it's accurate. You need to do it immediately when you realize it's a threat, and you need to do it over and over again, redundantly, so that everyone who needs to know the information is aware of it. And you want to communicate with the first responders in your community. Provide them with floor plans or blueprints of your building, so if they have to respond, they know what's where. So they know what they're looking for in the building. Number your doors, your exterior doors. Put numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many there are. You call the police department. There's an intruder in the building. Which door should I come in? Because they got the blueprint. You tell them door number 7. So they know that's the best place to come in, but they can find door number 7. Most importantly, make sure they know where you are. One of the best kept secrets in many communities is where the Christian school is. It doesn't do any good if you call them for help and they go, where are you? And then, very important, provide an alphabetical list of your students. Compile a notebook, page for each child, their name, their parents' emergency contact information, a already signed emergency medical release listing any allergies they have. Wherever that is kept, learning center, school office, the last person to leave that room grabs that notebook. So that you get out and a child is injured, flip, 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 call his parents, already got a signed emergency medical release so the EMTs or the paramedics can treat the child if they're injured, and they already know if they're allergic to penicillin or whatever it might be. Very important. And then communicate with the parents. Parents may ask you, do you have a school emergency plan? Or what security procedures do you have? Having a tight budget is not an acceptable excuse for neglecting safety needs in the eyes of parents, the media, judges, and juries. When an incident occurs that could have been prevented by reasonable risk reduction and preparedness procedures. Again, a plan in place can reduce your potential legal and financial responsibility. And then make your crisis plan available for review if asked. It's going to be a printed document. If a parent or somebody else wants to look at it, say, here, you can read it if you want to. The ultimate irony of crisis management is that even though a school prioritizes, prepares for, and practices emergency responses, the many hours that you have invested in that are all going toward preparing for something that you hope never happens. If an athletic team only practiced but never played, that's a waste of time. But if your school only drills your emergency plan but never have to put it into practice, that's the grace of God.